It all began with a flicker of light, as if the edges of my reality had begun to warp and bend. The world around me seemed to fade into nothingness, replaced by a swirling vortex of colors and shapes. I felt myself being sucked into the void, my heart racing with a mix of fear and exhilaration. As the darkness gave way to a dimly lit room, I found myself standing before an antique clock, its ornate gold hands frozen at midnight. The clock seemed to hum softly, as if it were alive, and the air around it vibrated with an unseen energy. I reached out to touch the clock's cold, smooth surface, and as my fingers brushed against its face, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The world tilted, and in a dizzying rush, I was transported back in time. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and cigarette smoke, and the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses filled the room. I looked around, trying to orient myself in this unfamiliar place, when a pair of familiar eyes met mine across the crowded room. There was something in his gaze that made my heart skip a beat. He was everything I'd ever wanted in a man. Tall, dark, and devilishly handsome, with a smile that could light up the night. He was the embodiment of all my romantic fantasies, and in this moment, I knew I was hopelessly in love with him. I fought my way through the crowd, feeling a sense of urgency and excitement coursing through my veins. I finally reached his side, and he took my hand in his touch sending a jolt of electricity through my body. "Hello, my name is Edward," he said, his voice deep and smooth like fine whiskey. "And you are?" I couldn't believe it. He was talking to me. He seemed to be interested in me. I couldn't help but wonder how long we would have together. Would it be enough? Would I be able to find a way back to my own time? So many questions raced through my mind, but for now, I was content to bask in the glow of his attention. "My name is Emily," I replied, feeling a blush creep up my neck. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Edward." As we talked, the world around us seemed to fade away, and it was as if there was nothing else in existence but the two of us. He told me stories of his travels and his life, and I found myself hanging on his every word, completely enchanted by his presence. I knew that I could spend eternity with this man, and the thought filled me with a sense of peace and contentment that I had never known before. But I also knew that there was a part of me that still belonged to my own time, to the life I had built and the people I loved there. I wondered if I would ever be able to choose between them. As the night wore on, we danced and laughed together, our bodies moving in perfect harmony. It felt as if we had known each other for a lifetime, as if we were destined to be together. I couldn't help but feel a pang of longing for this life, for the feeling of being truly known and loved by someone like Edward. But I also knew that I couldn't stay here forever. Eventually, I would have to make a choice, stay in this timeline with him, or return to my own, leaving behind a piece of my heart. The thought of leaving him was almost unbearable, but I knew that I couldn't abandon the life I had built either. As the clock struck midnight, the energy in the room shifted, and I felt a tugging sensation at the center of my chest. I glanced over at Edward, feeling a lump form in my throat as I tried to find the words to tell him what I was about to do. He smiled reassuringly at me, seeming to understand without me having to say anything. With one last look into his eyes, I closed my own, focusing on the image of my clock back in my own time. The world spun, and then with a rush of air and a burst of light, I was back in my own bedroom, the clock once again ticking softly on the wall. I collapsed onto my bed, my heart aching with the knowledge that I had left a part of myself behind in that other time. But I also knew that I had made the right decision. As I lay there, I could still feel Edward's presence, like a warmth that lingered even after he had left the room. And even though I knew I would never see him again, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the brief but incredible love that we had shared across the boundaries of time. I got up and made my way to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face to try and clear my head. The reflection in the mirror was of a young woman who looked much older than her years, a woman who had been touched by something beautiful and terrible at the same time. I didn't know how long it would take for the ache in my chest to subside, but I knew that I would carry Edward with me for the rest of my days, no matter how many more years those might be. As I dried off and returned to my room, I noticed a strange object on my nightstand. It was a pocket watch, ornately engraved with the initials EM. I smiled to myself, recognizing it as the same watch Edward had worn in his time. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my hand, and knew that somehow, he had found a way to give it to me. It was a token of his love, a reminder of the life we could have had together, even if only for a moment. I placed the pocket watch on my dresser, next to a small framed photograph of Edward and I from that night. It was the only picture I had of him, and it would serve as a constant reminder of the love that had crossed time itself. For a brief, shining moment, I had been loved by a man who was everything I could have ever hoped for. And even though I knew that I would never see him again, I was grateful for the memory, for the love that had filled my heart and made me feel truly alive. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself thinking of Edward more and more often. I would close my eyes and see his face, feel the warmth of his touch against my skin. I tried to imagine what he was doing in his own time, if he was happy, if he had found someone else. The thought of him moving on was almost unbearable, but I knew that I had to accept it. My life had to go on too. I threw myself into my work, pouring my heart and soul into my writing. It was the one thing that had always made me feel truly connected to something larger than myself, and in the aftermath of losing Edward, it became my lifeline. I wrote about love and loss, about the fragility of the human heart, about the way time can bend and twist and sometimes bring us together in ways we never thought possible. My words flowed like wine, and I found solace in the knowledge that somehow, through my writing, a part of Edward lived on.